The early days of aviation were a constant adventure, a combination of risk and reward, of daring do and nearly constant disaster. The line between what was heroism and what was foolishness was very thin, and small steps forward were most often accompanied by reach exceeding grasp. But few examples of early aviation had as ambitious a goals as those set for the nearly forgotten Airship America and its two nearly forgotten aviation pioneers, Walter Wellman and Adrian Vanaman. And, well, a cat. Because don't all good stories have a cat? Born in Ohio in 1858, Walter Wellman had a long career in journalism and had been a correspondent for the Chicago Herald and Record Herald. Representing the sensational journalism of the day, the Herald had sent Wellman to explore and write of his exploits. He wrote in May 1891 that the editor of the Chicago Herald wired me at Washington, "Can you find the spot where Columbus discovered America and mark it with a memorial?" My reply was, "We'll try." If it had been a request to find the North Pole or capture a mermaid, I suppose the answer would have been the same. Based on descriptions from Columbus's journal, Wellman decided that he had solved one of the great mysteries of history, placing the location of Columbus's landing in the Bahamas, building a marker there of stone and concrete in time to memorialize the quadricentennial of the year that the famous navigator had sailed the ocean blue. Having established his reputation, Wellman's comment in 1891 proved to be somewhat prophetic, as the next adventure on which the Herald sent him was to answer the polar question. That is, he led an expedition sponsored by the newspaper to be the first to discover the North Pole. Expeditions had attempted to reach the pole as early as 1827, but all had fallen short, often with disastrous results. An 1879 attempt by U.S. Navy officer George DeLong had resulted in the loss of his ship and the deaths of half his crew. But Wellman had a different plan. He explained, "Most Arctic expeditions with which Americans are familiar approach the pole by way of Smith Sound. Even the English have chosen the Greenland route for most of their efforts. But we do not go that way, strewn with wrecked ships, bleached bones, and dead hopes as it is." Rather, Wellman believed that the true road to the pole was that true highway to the far north carved out of the ice by the influence of the Gulf Stream in the Norwegian Sea. It was a daring idea, but one that was as doomed as the other expeditions had been. The expedition, trying to reach the pole via snow sledges and aluminum boats, lost its means of return when the steamer he had chartered was crushed by ice. The expedition had to be abandoned, eventually finding a whaling boat to take them home. Undeterred, he made another attempt in 1898, which again failed, although it did make some Arctic discoveries. But Wellman was still undeterred. Journalist Adam Rovner writes on HistoryNet in 2019, "In an early bit of gonzo journalism, Wellman cast himself as the best hope to reach the North Pole and glorify the United States and his friend, President Theodore Roosevelt. Disappointed with his attempts to reach the pole by sledge, he turned to another technology of the day." Time magazine writes, "At the century's turn, Walter Wellman was an adventuring journalist, having discovered the exact landing place of Columbus and led 2 unsuccessful searches for the North Pole. He persuaded publisher Frank B. Noyes in 1906 to put up $75,000 for an airship flight to the pole." Airships.net writes, "Within a year, Wellman had raised the funds to commission a 50.3-meter non-rigid airship from the Goddard family of France, famous for their balloons. And he built an airship hangar and base camp on Danes Island off the coast of Spitsbergen in the Svalbard archipelago of Norway. The airship, which was properly a blimp rather than a dirigible, having no internal structure, was 165 feet long, inflated with hydrogen, carried a gondola that could fit a crew of 5 and was powered by 2 80-horsepower propellers. Wellman announced that he believed that the airship would finally solve the problem that has baffled all others. The same year, an expedition by Robert Peary, using sledges, had again failed. But the airship struggled from the start, as the structure proved unable to hold the weight of the engines. The need for a solution is what put Wellman in contact with Melvin Vanaman. Chester Melvin Vanaman first earned fame as a photographer. The Honolulu Star Bulletin wrote of him in 1902, "See, Melvin Vanaman, when he is on terra firma, is a medium-sized American with an amused expression and a 4-foot camera." Born in Virden, Illinois in 1866, Vanaman's parents were members of the Dunkard Brethren Church, conservative Anabaptists, Robner writes, as a young man growing up in a sober, practical household, Vanaman channeled his energies and aptitude towards repairing engines and other devices on the family farm in Virden, Illinois. And like many restless sons from across the Midwest, he dreamed of escaping his small-town existence. His first attempt at escape came as a musician, both singing and playing guitar with an opera company, a profession that suddenly left him stranded in Hawaii when, Rivner explains, a plague scare forced his company to disband. That is when Vanaman became a photographer, and an exceptional one. Taking promotional photos for the Oceanic Steamship Company, he pioneered the process of panoramic photography. The Star Advertiser explains, if for no other reason, Vanaman will be remembered for the great cameras which he succeeded in manufacturing and operating in this city. His pictures of marine views about Hawaii have become the wonder and admiration of the people here and abroad. These photographs were panoramas taken with his special camera and up to 6 feet long. The camera allowed him, the Star Advertiser reports, to take a snapshot of 20 or 30 miles of country with the biggest plate in the world. His fame in Hawaii and a book in a hotel lobby sent him to New Zealand. Vanaman would become well known for his photographs of Hawaii and then New Zealand, but his pictures were not just impressive because they were large. Vanaman's photography was as unique as his camera. The Star Advertiser writes, if he cannot get a boat with a high topmast, he gets a pole erected instead. In Honolulu, a person who wanted a photograph of his ironworks put up a pole 107 feet high, and the aerial artist got his 4-foot negative from near the top of it. Taking his photographs from daring heights, including eventually from a hot air balloon, earned the man with the amused expression, the sobriquet, the Daredevil Photographer. And it also was a natural progression, River writes, to go from fame as a daredevil photographer to experiment with the latest fad, airplanes. He relocated to Paris, then a center of aircraft development. There he took to designing aircraft. But airplanes of the era were a dicey business, Robner explains. In its infancy, aeronautics was an often fatal game of chance as much as a science. Each week brought reports of aviators dashed to their deaths. Vanaman was daring, but he also lost faith in airplanes, especially for carrying cargo, writing, I once had great faith in airplanes, but I am firmly set in my belief that the airplane will never be a cargo carrier. And thus the photographer turned aircraft designer made his first connection to another technology of the day, the dirigible. And this skilled aeronautical engineer happened to be in Paris, right as Wellman was looking for someone who could make his airship ready for a trip to the North Pole. Robner writes, the top-headed Wellman hired Vanaman to enlarge his sausage-shaped Airship America, which had been built for a previous attempt on the pole. For months, Vanaman toiled in his stained mechanic overalls and peaked cap to extend the dirigible's flexible hydrogen-filled gas bag. In addition to expanding the ship, at 180 feet long, the new airship was now the second largest airship ever built and nearly the size of the Zeppelins being built in Germany. But he also added important features. The Bangor, Maine Commercial reported that Chief Engineer Vanaman had arranged an ingenious device in the form of a little overhead railway, which carries a suspended car containing 600 pounds of food. And this car can be run the whole length of the structure, 115 feet. So much ballast, movable at our will, by working a cord in the engine room. Vanaman also devised a way to use the excess heat from the engines to melt the snow off the top of the airship. But perhaps most notable was something called the sausage guide rope, which the Owensboro, Kentucky Messenger explains apparently is a wonderful device. It will serve as extra ballast. It will hold the airship in place, prevent it from bobbing, and it will be the pantry of the America crew. In it will be stored the food. This was a leather rope consisting of several 10-foot compartments strung together like a string of sausages and armored with metal scales like those of a fish that would drag behind the airship. The guide rope, the messenger writes, which is to be serviceable as ballast, anchor, and ladder for this immense aerial institution, is one of the all-important features. The rope was a technical challenge, but Wellman insisted that Mr. Vanaman was equal to the occasion. Wellman confidently predicted that in 1907 he will reach the North Pole this summer in his motor airship. And, of course, he was wrong. The weather was bad, and when the ship finally launched in September, it was unable to make headway. The compass failed, and the crew couldn't see through the storm. Lost, they nearly flew into mountains. America flew for over 3 hours, but made it only 15 miles and had to set down. Robner writes, although the airship performed well initially, the weather turned violent, and the crew and their 10 sledge dogs crashed ignobly onto the ice. Still, Wellman was undaunted, pinning his hopes on 1908. The Newcastle upon Tyne Evening Chronicle reported that the first year he had good weather but a bad airship. During the second year, he had an airship which had proved itself in every way to be reliable and satisfactory, but has had to encounter the worst weather known in the Arctic for a period of 30 years. Next year, he will still have the best possible type of airship, but we can only hope for better luck in the way of weather. The next attempt actually wouldn't come until 1909. Vanaman took a break long enough to achieve an aircraft first. Alana Davies, a curator at the State Library of New South Wales, explains on the library website. In 1906, he tested a triplane of his own design, and in December 1908 was credited with the first successful triplane flight, exhibiting the machine at the first Paris Air Show in 1909. Triplanes were to achieve great popularity during the latter part of World War I. But, Rovner writes, despite the early promise of Vanaman's triplane, Wellman lured him back to the Arctic, this time accompanied by a Russian pilot named Nicholas Popov, a reported acrophobic. Once again, Wellman was confident of success. The Montreal Star reported that Wellman himself is confident of one day attaining his object, there can be no doubt. Whatever critics may say, Wellman told the paper, our experience has proved to our satisfaction that we have an airship which is capable of making a journey to the pole and back. The airship began its attempt on August 16th. It failed. The Dublin, Ireland Independent reported, the airship started admirably, the engines working to perfection. She answered her helm and maneuvered splendidly, traveling northward at a speed of 25 miles. Suddenly, when near a pack of ice north of Spitsbergen, the leather tubular guide rope, in which were stored 1,100 pounds of provisions, broke away. Without the rope, the airship rose quickly. Vanaman got it under control with the engines, but the trip to the pole was impossible. Vanaman managed to drive the ship to the coast, where they caught a tow from a surprised Norwegian steamship. Rovner writes, amazed sailors watched as Wellman coolly lit a cigar, while just as coolly, Vanaman launched America's lifeboat beneath 250,000 cubic feet of explosive hydrogen. The America had made it less than 100 miles into its 700-mile journey. The Independent reported, Mr. Wellman will be unable to make another attempt this year, but still has faith in the practicability of this project. But a disaster of sorts would occur before that could happen. Although contested today, in 1909, Commander Perry finally succeeded in reaching the pole. Wellman's dreams of being first were dashed. You might imagine that even the redoubtable Wellman would finally be discouraged, but that would be underestimating him. Time magazine writes, against such a background, Walter Wellman became the talk of two continents when in 1910 he attempted to fly from Atlantic City to Europe in the rebuilt America with a crew of 5 and a mascot kitten. Davies writes, Wellman turned his attention to a more impressive feat, the first aerial crossing of the Atlantic. Fearing a German or French airship might beat him to the honor, he made hasty preparations, aiming for the summer of 1910. The America was enlarged again to 9,760 cubic meters volume, giving a lifting capacity of 12 tons, with a new gondola and engines fitted. Vanaman and his wife Ida moved from Paris back to the United States to complete the modifications. The dangerously overloaded America was launched on 15 October 1910 for its historic journey, with a crew of 6, including Wellman and Vanaman, and a stowaway cat. Patrick Roberts writes on the website Purr and Fur, Famous Felines, he was a gray tabby, one of former stray twin cats that lived around the airship hangar, but unfortunately his brother was killed there by a wolfhound a few weeks before the flight. Kiddo, usually referred to by the crew as Kitty, belonged to one of the crew members of Walter Wellman's Airship America. This was, apparently, another first. The first cat known to have flown on an airship, although one may have flown in a balloon as early as 1785. The London Telegraph reports that Murray Simon, a 29-year-old junior officer serving on the Oceanic, one of the many sister ships of the yet-to-be-launched Titanic, had been given special permission by his employers to become the America's navigator. He picked up a stray cat that had been living in the America's hangar. Like many sailors, he was superstitious. We can never have luck without a cat on board, he wrote. Roberts writes that Kiddo spent the start of the journey curled up in the radio man's compartment. But as the airship went out to sea, Kiddo really did not seem to enjoy his first experience of flying, mewling, howling, and rushing around like a squirrel in a cage, according to the log, and generally getting on the nerves of the first engineer, Melvin Vanaman. Thus an interesting first. The America was the first airship to be equipped with a radio wireless. The first known wireless radio message from the air to the ground was reportedly, "Come and get this goddamn cat." Kiddo would become famous for that line. But Vanaman wouldn't get his way. The Telegraph writes, Vanaman stuffed Kiddo into a bag and attempted to lower it onto the motor launch following the airship. But the boat was too far behind, and the cat was pulled back up again. Luckily, Roberts writes, Kiddo soon regained his equilibrium and his spirits, and behaved fairly well. Indeed, the crew found him more useful than any barometer. You must never cross the Atlantic in an airship without a cat, as Murray Simon put it. And this final attempt at fame for the Airship America, as even Kiddo seemed to suspect, of course, failed. The great gas bag, like gas bags of all types tend to do, started to leak. The guide rope, called an equilibriator that kept the airship on course and prevented it from bobbing, dragged the airship down, and reports came of a hurricane coming up the coast. By the third day, the crew realized that the ship wouldn't make it. The Telegraph writes, after a hazardous operation, with the airship being blown along at speeds of up to 25 knots, the lifeboat was eventually lowered safely into the sea, complete with all crew, including the cat. The airship, still airborne and now considerably lighter, vanished over the horizon. Time magazine writes, the America vanished into the skies. Wellman declared victory. We are defeated in our attempt to reach Europe, but we are not discredited, he wrote, noting the ship had traveled more than 1,000 miles and stayed aloft for 72 hours. We have established a record of which we are proud. We sacrificed the airship, but we saved our lives, and above all, we have gathered a vast amount of useful knowledge, which will help largely in the solution of big problems relating to the navigation of the air. And we also saved the cat. While BBC reports the crew returned to New York, where they were welcomed as heroes with a ticker-tape parade and a banquet. My grandfather received marriage proposals from damsels captivated by his adventure, Anthony Simon, the navigator's grandson, tells the BBC. Offers for vaudeville lectures and articles rained down from the skies. The one who got the most attention was, of course, Kiddo. Wellman wrote, real heroes are never self-conscious, are always conscious of suspicion and slander, of danger, of over-generous praise, and therefore are never two-legged. Although the Telegraph writes that its ultimate failure means that this remarkable and pioneering flight was overshadowed in the annals of aviation, the trials and travails of the Airship America were well representative of both the optimism and the risks of the age of early aviation and the heroic age of exploration. Perhaps it was just an airship ahead of its time. It wouldn't be for another 9 years until May of 1919 that there was a successful crossing of the Atlantic by air. And it wasn't until the following July that a cat named Wopsy would successfully make the trip on a British airship. There wouldn't be a dirigible over the North Pole until 1926. And of course, there's some undeniable poetry in the fact that the America just floated off by itself, never to be seen again, as if it might still be up there somewhere. I'd start the search at the North Pole. But the true danger of the era did show on July 2, 1912. Melvin Vanaman made a second attempt to cross the Atlantic, this time on an airship newly built by the Goodyear Company, the Akron. In front of a crowd of 20,000 people, including Vanaman's wife, the airship was only airborne a few minutes when its 40,000 cubic feet of hydrogen exploded. Vanaman and his 4 crew members, including his brother Calvin, were all killed. The Daredevil Photographer was 45 years old. Wellman had not been on board. He never went aloft again after the 1910 attempt. He passed away in 1934. Kiddo lived out his life with Wellman's daughter, Edith. Of course, it's all nearly forgotten today. But as the BBC noted, on the 100th anniversary of the attempt to cross the Atlantic, although the voyage of the Airship America ended in failure, the effort gripped the world and hinted at what the future of air travel might hold. I hope you enjoyed watching this episode of The History Guy, and if you did, please feel free to like and subscribe and share The History Guy with your friends. And if you also believe that history deserves to be remembered, then you can support The History Guy as a member on YouTube, a supporter on our community at Locals, or as a patron on Patreon. You can also check out our great merchandise shop or book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo.